Hello and welcome to another video on Total War Saga Troy. This video is going to go over the brand new Mythos units and how to use them. Of course, this is going to cover the new mythical creatures and their unique units, but it's also going to cover the mythic units we had in the game already that have now got completely mythical counterparts. So without further ado, let's get into our first unit. First up, we have Harpies. These guys are lightly armored flyers that are great at taking on the enemy backline ranged units. They also excel at taking out retreating units and making sure they don't come back with their viciousness unbound ability. They do tend to fall off when fighting against anything that does decent damage or has armor, since they are so damn squishy. You don't want to send these guys into the front lines, just keep them purely on the back and attacking the ranged units, and they should do just fine. They also have a slightly beefed up variation, the Harpy Fiends. These guys are still low armored flyers, but they are now slightly better in melee. They are basically the same as regular Harpies, but better in pretty much every single stat aside from speed. You still don't want to go against anything too elite, since they still have low defense, and their damage doesn't quite get through even light armor. So just keep sending them into the back lines, taking out the ranged units and anything retreating. Next up, we have Centaur Hunters, which are a light cavalry skirmishing unit. They have good armor piercing damage and excellent speed. They can get around the backs of the enemy lines and fire into their backs with decent armor piercing damage. Do not send them into melee, since their stats and damage are terrible. Keep them on skirmish and keep them safe. There are also two other variations of this type of Centaur unit, the Centaur Scouts, which become a medium cav unit, which also gain a shield and a decent charge bonus. They're very similar to Hunters, but gain improvements to basically all stats aside from losing ammo. They're a hybrid weapons unit that can do some armor piercing missile damage, but are also nice for some charging around. Keep them charging and they will use their ammo passively if you leave them on fire at will. We also get Centaur Outriders, which are a heavy cav unit, which gain better defense, armor, and a better shield, and the ability to cause fear. They are a heavier version of the Scouts that gain improvements to most stats aside from losing a little bit of speed. They want to be used more or less the same, but can also survive a little bit in actual melee combat and will do good damage versus most things. Charge them and leave them in as long as they aren't getting swarmed, and they should do quite well and use that ammo passively. Next up, we have Centaur Archers. These are a medium cav unit with brilliant speed and a great skirmishers. Over Centaur Hunters, they gain improvements to most stats, but lose a little bit of missile damage. They do gain better range and ammo, so can fire from safer locations and for longer, but will do less damage per volley. They also gain a Centaurian circle formation that increases their missile capabilities, but reduces their accuracy. There is also another variant of these guys, the Centaur Elders, which are again a medium cav unit with brilliant speed, but they also gain in courage and a decent charge. They are basically improved archers that gain improvements to every single stat, but attack and speed. They want to be used more or less the same, keep them behind the enemies on skirmish, and get them firing to the enemy backs from a safe location. With their ammo, they should last most of the battle, but if they run out, then take on retreating units, since their melee stats aren't too great, even if the charge bonus is that little bit better. We also have Centaur Fighters, which are a light cav with poor defense but a decent charge. These are your shock cavalry charge bonus focused Centaur units. They don't have the greatest charge in the world, but they can do decently well if they cycle charge weak and ranged units. Don't leave them in melee combat or they will get torn to pieces, since their stats are really not great at all. They also have a couple of buffed up variations of this type of Centaur. We have the Centaur Warriors, which are a heavy cav unit with excellent charge, poor defense, and shields and armor. They gain improvements to nearly every single stat aside from the speed, and also gain access to a wedge formation to improve their charge bonus. They are brilliant chargers, so you want to keep them cycling and on the move all the time, otherwise they will get torn to ribbons when swarmed. Finally, we have the Centaur Lancers, which are a heavy cav charging unit with excellent morale, armor, shield, and the ability to cause fear. These are your elite charging centaurs. They gain improvements to damage and defense stats that make them into incredible chargers. Keep them cycling and never let them sit still, otherwise the damage just isn't there. Make use of that same wedge formation as much as possible to maximize their damage. But be warned, it does come at the cost of a little bit of speed, so if they're trying to run away, definitely don't be using this one. Next up, we have Sirens, which are a light flying ranged unit. You want to use these ladies as exclusively skirmishers, since their melee stats and armor aren't there at all. Their flight and high speed allows them to get over and around the enemies to allow them to fire into enemy backs relatively safely. If they get shot at, keep them on the move to avoid damage as much as possible. They also have the Sirens lure ability, which allows them to cause an enemy unit to go berserk and out of control, meaning it will attack whatever it finds closest to it. These are a great option for peppering the enemy lines with light damage over a long period of time. Giant Skirmishers are next, and they are a medium weight ranged unit. They have excellent armor piercing damage, Vanguard deployment, but poor defense. They're a high damage ranged infantry with a stupidly high HP pool. They don't have the best melee stats in the world, but with all that HP, you have plenty of time to get help over to them. Their damage from a range means you want to focus on the highest armor targets you can on the enemy side and chew through them. Just make sure you get on the flanks, otherwise the friendly fire will certainly not feel good. They also have the Children of Gaia ability that allows them to regenerate HP for 30 seconds and adds up to a large amount of their total HP and can be used every 2 minutes. We also gain Giant Bowmen, which are another medium weight ranged unit. These guys sacrifice a bit of damage for a lot more range and a bunch more ammo. You want to still get them around enemies and shoot into their backs or sides to avoid that friendly fire. Since they don't do as much damage, it's not as important to focus their armored targets, but certainly go for whatever is the highest tier, since they still have incredible damage even if it isn't all armor piercing. Still the same story in melee, however, not great fighters, but tons of HP and regen, so you don't really need to worry about them too much if they get charged. We also have the Giant Vanguard, which are a heavy class shielded frontlines giants unit. They come with shields and are brilliant for tearing down enemy gates. These guys are a fantastic frontlines monster infantry that you can embed into your front lines and keep them safe, just like monsters in Warhammer. They do incredible damage with a bonus versus large, so if the enemy has any monster infantry or cav of their own, send these guys in and they won't last long. They still have a ton of HP and regen, so will last an incredibly long time in combat. We also have Giant Spearmen, which are another heavy class monstrous infantry unit. These guys have better defense, gain armor as well as their shields, and are still brilliant versus gates. They are a tougher but less damaging monstrous infantry, but still want to be used mostly the same. Embed them in the front lines and focus on any enemy large units that come close to make the most of that armor piercing and anti-large damage. Of course, they are even tougher than the Vanguard counterparts, and yes, they can still regenerate, so will basically never leave the battlefield. Our final giant unit is the Giant Champions, and again, they are a heavy class frontlines monstrous infantry unit. These guys have brilliant morale and even have the Encourage passive, which means units nearby gain a bonus to their morale. They are melee experts and of course are still brilliant at tearing down gates. They are the pinnacle of the giant melee troops with the most HP, armor, and damage of them all. They're extremely strong units, but the use case remains pretty much the same. Keep them in the front lines and focus on the most elite enemy units you can find, since that damage will melt through anything. Of course, they can still regen, so if by some miracle they get to low HP, take them out, regen, and send them back in. Now come to the Courier Bounties, which is a heavy class monstrous speedy infantry unit. These guys are experts in flanking and come with brilliant armor piercing damage and immunity to psychology and resilient stamina. They're a speedy, heavy monstrous infantry, which is basically upright lines, which look very spooky. They do incredible damage with a huge wodge of armor piercing and a bonus versus heroes, making them into fantastic hero snipers. If there are no heroes to target, charge them into the backs of the front lines and watch them evaporate. They can also be sent against ranged units, but with damage this high, it's almost a waste. They also come with the Lion's Roar ability that reduces the morale of nearby enemy units, and if you get a couple of these guys and manage to stack this, then they can break pretty much anything. Next up we have the Spartoi, which are an extremely heavy spearman unit. They're immune to flanking, are melee experts, have perfect vigor, but unfortunately come with rampage. They're a stupidly heavy infantry made from living dragon's teeth. They are incredible frontlines units that can hold a line for a stupidly long amount of time. They do pretty great damage with a bonus versus large, so if you place them on the flanks of your army, the enemy cav won't be able to touch them. They never retreat, but once the battle turns out of their favor, they start to crumble like my boys, the Vampire Counts. They come with the Seeds of Dragon ability that allows them to regenerate a massive amount of HP and resurrect fallen entities, but it can only be used once per battle. Next up we have the Cyclops, and this is the first of our gargantuan units. He's an excellent attacker with a ridiculous amount of damage and also a special ranged weapon. This big lad has decent speed and excels at wading into enemy lines and doing huge amounts of damage in large area of effect attacks. They have a ridiculous amount of weapon strength with bonuses versus infantry and massive armor piercing, so basically anything in their enemy lines, they can take it on. Just make sure there aren't enemy ranged units, otherwise he's a pretty large target. He also has 3 abilities: Hold a Toss, Poseidon's Offerings, and Blind Rage. Our final generic mythical unit is the Minotaur, and yes, he's another gargantuan unit. He's a melee expert, damage dealer, and also a duelist, so excels at taking on other single entities, such as other Minotaurs or even Cyclops. He's very similar to the Cyclops, but a little smaller, with less damage, but more melee stats, speed, and charge bonus. He wants to be charging around the map, tearing up any enemies he can find. He pairs well with the Courier Bounties to charge into the enemy rears with that massive weapon damage and charge bonus. Honestly, not much it can't take on, just make sure to take out enemy ranged units, since again, he is pretty large. He also has 3 abilities: Bull Rush, Savage Roar, and Gore. Now we come to the Cerberus Unis, and each of these mythical monster unit sets has a specific buff to themselves. Cerberus units are all unbreakable. First up we have the Wretched Shades, which are a medium weight infantry unit. They have poor attack, but brilliant defense, and of course, are unbreakable, so will stick around for a stupidly long time. They're an extremely tanky spear infantry with pretty weak damage and attack stats, but they can take a massive amount of punishment. You want to back them up with other damage dealers such as monsters and ranged units, otherwise they will get slowly chipped down. Once reaching a kill threshold in battle, they gain a massive boost to damage, so if you can somehow rush this, then they become way better. Next up we have the Marksmen of Elysium. These are a medium class archers unit. They have excellent missile range and are also decent melee combatants. They are powerful archer units that do brilliant ranged armor piercing damage from very, very far away, that also demoralize their targets. They also have decent melee stats, but you really want to use all the ammo up first. Once reaching the kill threshold, they gain a boost to their range damage, making them even more deadly. Next we have the Spearmasters of Elysium. They use an extremely heavy spears unit. They're resistant to flanking, have excellent defense, and are of course unbreakable. They are more or less improved versions of the Shades that are now somehow even tankier with way more armor and defense, but also gain a little boost to their damage. They're a brilliant frontlines unit that can hold the line for a stupidly long time and do some decent damage whilst doing it, but will still appreciate the assistance. Once reaching a kill threshold, they gain massive bonuses to their melee stats. They also come with the Pact of Punishment ability, which makes them do a ton more damage, but also means the unit will be sent right to Hades as soon as it runs out. Finally, we have the Giant Shades, which are a heavy Giants infantry unit. You have decent defense and melee experts. They're extremely tanky and high damage, monstrous infantry. Use them pretty much like the other giant melee units, since they will behave more or less the same, but will just never break. Upon reaching the kill threshold, they gain massive buffs to their melee. Of course, we come to the Cerberus unit, which is of course a gargantuan. Has pretty great speed and is a melee expert as well as a defender, and it is a hugely tanky, monstrous doggo that does incredible damage to basically anything. Send it into or around the front lines against anything, and it will clean up and chase down anything with that high speed. Make sure to take out enemy ranged units, otherwise this lad will get focused down pretty fast. He also comes with 3 abilities: Summon Shades, Howl of the Underworld, and Fires of Phlegathon. We now come to the Hydra units, which all gain regeneration and poison attacks. First up, the Drinkers of Venom. They're a light, expendable melee infantry unit without any really strong stats, but they do have poison, so can apply the effect to do steady damage over time. Other than that, their only real strength is the massive HP pool and regen, which allows them to stick around for way longer than you'd think, but they will still need missiles or monsters to do the damage for them, especially with that low morale. We have the Hydra Archers, which are a decent archers unit, despite their poor accuracy. They do that poison damage over time from afar, and also in melee if the mood takes them. To be honest, these guys aren't really the best, since their damage is kind of low, so once they get going against armor, they will have a bit of a drop-off. Against chaff or large units, however, they can do pretty good. We have the Hydra Defenders, which are a heavy spear infantry. They are armored and shielded, and have good defense, which of course makes them stupidly tanky. They are not too bad in the damage department, but against armor, they don't have a lot, but of course excel in defensive battling and anti-large. Pull in some missile and monster units to do most of the damage and keep them alive as they can be. Finally, we have the Hydra Priest, which is the first spellcast unit that we've seen. This guy is low armor, but does come with Encourage, so will increase the morale of nearby friendly units. He's a single entity that acts as a minor hero type. They do decent damage in combat, but don't have the most defense and HP, so should really be kept as supporting units with their abilities. Speaking of which, they have 2, Poison Ritual and Regenerative Mixture. Finally, we come to the Lunion Hydra. This is of course a gargantuan unit with excellent missile range and incredible damage. This is a huge tanky monster with a ton of damage in all departments. They can fire huge amounts of armor-piercing poison damage from an artillery-like range. If you manage to run out of ammo, then send them into the front lines and they continue doing serious amounts of work. Just clear the map of ranged units since they are still kinda large targets. They also come with 3 abilities: Poison Breath, Poison Bomb, and Virulent Blood. Finally, we come to the Griffin units, and all of these guys have incredible speed. We have the Arima Spy Hunters, which are a light spear infantry unit. They have excellent speed, Vanguard deployment, and stalk, which makes them into excellent units for sneaking around the backs of enemies and charging into their rear. They are spear infantry first, since the ranged is more of a bonus rather than their primary function. Keep them on melee mode and have them charging around the front lines to get into the enemy back lines or the backs of the front lines. They have pretty decent damage in both melee and range, but not the toughest or best melee stats, so really more of a blitz attacker. They also come with the Snare Traps ability. We have the Arima Spy Spearman, which are a medium-class spear infantry unit. They again keep that excellent speed and Vanguard deployment, but lose the stalk, but still expert flankers. They are high damage spear infantry that have great speed, so excel at getting around the enemy and taking on ranged units or surrounding the enemy front lines. They do pretty good damage with high melee attack and aren't too bad in defense, so you want to get them in and leave them there to take down enemies as rapidly as possible. We have the Irima Spy Skirmishers, which are a medium-class cav skirmishing unit. They of course have brilliant speed and armor-piercing damage. They are stupidly fast skirmishing cav that deal great damage from a range. Keep them on skirmish and get them around the backs of the enemy lines so they can do sustained damage. They don't have the most range or ammo, so be prepared to keep them on the move and do the odd charge if the occasion calls for it. We have the Lesser Griffin, which is a gargantuan flying unit with good charge and decent damage. This is a larger flying single entity that does a huge amount of damage, but also isn't really the best at defense since, well, look at it. Send this into the back lines to take on enemy ranged units and they should get shredded pretty quickly. Can also send it on enemy ranged heroes since their damage output is so high that the risk of taking damage is pretty low. Finally, we have the Griffin Patriarch, which is of course another gargantuan flyer. This has an even better charge and even more damage. It's basically a stronger Lesser Griffin in every way but speed. Use it in more or less the same way, but it now has the added ability of assisting in the front lines so long as it doesn't get surrounded, since the armor and defense is still relatively low. It also comes with 2 abilities, Savage Gust and Rallying Screech. And that concludes every single mythical unit explained in Total War Troy. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then do be sure to leave it a like, it really does help out. And if you want to see more videos like this and more coverage on Troy, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. I'd like to take this time to thank all supporters of the channel, in particular Kobe Said So and It's Your Boy LC for their fantastic support at the Unclean Ones tier. Thank you very much for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.